Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 17th of April 2025. I got it right that time, so I'm going to give myself a congratulatory gulp of tea. That's how all videos should start. We are going to look at the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply. Of course, you can find them linked in the description to the video below. We have 1,230 personnel lost. It's an uptick from yesterday's, I think, 1,050. Back to broadly where we've seen it. 16 tanks is higher than average. 54 troop-carrying AFVs is over double the daily average. So all of these stats suggest heavy activity on the front line. 65 artillery pieces is pretty much triple the daily average. Very high there as well. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems. Wow, this is a good day for the Ukrainians. 170 vehicles and fuel tanks and 3 pieces of special equipment. And remember, I keep giving you evidence to suggest that these vehicles and fuel tanks, golf buggies, quads, motorcycles, are being used as combat assets. We're going to look into this with some video evidence to completely support that as well, or evidence from the front line. Just a lot of losses here. Okay, the personnel losses aren't the biggest that we've seen, but they're near the 1,300. You know, I mean, anything over 1,000 is a bad day at the office for the Russians, and they don't lose lower than 1,000 at the moment on any given day. I can't remember the last time it was below 1,000. So this is a really challenging day for the Russians. They've definitely been attacking. You can see that from the losses of AFVs and tanks and vehicles and fuel tanks. Just they are attacking. They were attacking yesterday. Okay, what do we find out from other sources? We hear from, this is BBC Russia and Mediadzona, who are compiling all the evidence of Russian deaths from obituaries, social media declarations, and whatnot. Of course, this doesn't include DPR and LPR. These are not deaths from within units associated with the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic forces inside Ukraine. And this is a benchmark minimum, right? This is absolutely who has died. Like 100%, give or take. This is the bare minimum number of people that died. A very conservative estimate, but these are definitely the in history. I often talk about, is it termine ad diem, whichever it is, when you have a historical event and you're like, well, it couldn't have happened before this and it couldn't have happened after that, so it definitely happened somewhere in between here. We have the minimum deaths that the Russians have suffered are 102,000, and the maximum is going to be somewhere up here. Now, this is where you look at the Russian losses. Russian losses according to the Ukrainian General Staff, 937,440. That includes dead, wounded, and of course, the majority of this number is going to be wounded, POWs, and deserted. Okay, so what are the deaths in that? I don't know. We don't have an official number from the Ukrainians, but a lot of people say around sort of 250,000, 200,000. So for the BBC Russia and Mediadzona to say definitely 102,000 people have died, then that's a really good place to start. Add on the LPR and the DPR, add on those that have been missed off. This is not exhaustive, but it is a pretty decent place to start. This is incredible to think that the Russians have lost 102,000 people at the very minimum, dead. And in fact, there was, I forget where it was, Bashkortostan. They were just unloading coffins from the front line from Ukraine in Bashkortostan, and there were just, tons of coffins. This is a war that is having a tremendous effect on the Russians. And then, you put that together with the first bit of news I was going to put in the other section. Russia's birth rate falls to a 200-year low. They are in trouble, right? And there's a long-term demographic demise, but they are sending a lot of people to die in Ukraine, and 102,000 is the absolute minimum there. Goodness me. Incredible. Moving on. Now, this is in Belgorod. So Russian conscripts report a strike on a convoy of 5 KAMAZ trucks in Belgorod region, which with reportedly over 60 of these Russians killed doing their duty in the borderland. In Russian chat groups, it is said they were all recently drafted. So this could be conscripts from the 160,000 number that was I was discussing yesterday in a live stream, where someone asked me what's the news with 160,000. I said, well, it's a mobilization number, and I was like, well, first of all, it's not a mobilization number; it's a conscription number for the annual national service, and they've upped it from 120,000 to 160,000. So that's a worry that they could get 40,000 more people, but these people have to stay within Russia. They can't get drafted to the front lines unless they turn these people into contract soldiers, and that's what the Russian MOD is going to be trying to do: get them to become contract soldiers and then hoik them off to the front lines. Otherwise, they have to stay in the border areas, so they can fight, I believe, in, say, Kursk, where the Ukrainians have moved into Kursk, and in the Belgorod region, where the Ukrainians have gone into Belgorod. So if you've got a group of these conscripts being sent, complete recruits here, not even green, being sent to the front line in Belgorod, poor young lads, but that's what happens when you declare war on your neighboring sovereign country. Now, in Belgorod, please go and check my live stream yesterday. I had an excellent surprise appearance from Andrew Perpetua, who came on, and we had a chat about all sorts of things. One area we talked about was this area in Belgorod. So you have the Kursk region, where the Ukrainians still control maybe some tiny bits of Kursk, but the Russians have pushed back in to a huge degree around there, and they're possibly pushing down south of the border in some of these places. But he said that actually this is very difficult terrain. This is like a defender's dream around here, so it's going to be quite difficult for the Russians to push further. And then the Ukrainians were wanting to create a buffer zone in Belgorod, and he said in this Belgorod region, where they're fighting in Popivka and Demidovka, there are very few roads to get here. And he said, and you've got here, you've got a drone. If we go back one day, you've got explosions here. So I showed you yesterday a road of death, right? Which is a video of, let's see if I can get that here. Yeah, video of this road whereby someone was driving down it, a Russian was driving down it, and you just saw all sorts of vehicles blown up by the side of the road. And he said that there is just a nightmare for the Russians as they try and reinforce these areas that they're fighting over, Demidovka and Popivka. And there's only really one sensible road in there. Some of these other roads are just farm roads, not unmetalled roads. And trying to get in is a nightmare because these are under fire control of drones and whatnot. Then you go, okay, well, that's really interesting. So things are getting destroyed as they come in here. And then you hear that, okay, 5 Kamaz trucks in Belgorod region with 60 conscripts in, with more than 60, but 60 have been killed, have been destroyed. One assumes that is going to be along this road as it comes in towards Demidovka, so that you assume that they were reinforcing the Russians there. Just piecing that together, I mean, it might not be there, but could well be, as the Ukrainians have also destroyed bridges on these other roads to make these unusable, and that forces the Russians to come in through this road up here. So clever of the Ukrainians to do that, to force people into a choke point and then attack that choke point. And it's not too dissimilar, actually, from what happened in Kursk, where the road into Shuya, this was the main road, and the Russians were hitting stuff all the way back here as well, back in Sumy. And so the Ukrainians lost an awful lot of kit trying to get into the Kursk area, because there weren't many options for accessing this whole sector, really coming on this one road. And if it's not too wide a bridgehead, then it means you can get your drones in to attack. So, for example, if your drones can go 20 kilometers, then you can be over here with your drone team, and that's actually outside of the sector. So it's really relatively easy for the Russians to have hit that supply road. If we do another one here, so looking at this road coming in, I mean, goodness me, that's only 11 kilometers to there. So you can have drone teams the other side of the border and absolutely hammer this road as it comes in. That's just a mere 10 kilometers away. And actually, you could have drone teams much closer than that. So really difficult for the Russians there. Now, Russians also, there's a lot of footage coming out at the moment. We went through a real, slim pickings, a period of slim pickings, whereby I was doing a lot more reporting in this video on like peace talks and whatnot because videos weren't coming out. Weather might have gotten away. But also, I think the Russians are just attacking a lot more at the moment. Russians tried to storm the 59th Motorized Brigade near Pokrovsk, rolled in with tanks, trucks, and infantry. The tanks got stuck near Seladova. So just to let you know where Seladova is, we're going down on this map. We're going to Pokrovsk area, and there's Pokrovsk, and you've got Seladova further to the south. Where are you, Seladove? Goodness me, things get moved back as the front line has moved so far forward. But anyway, Seladove is in this area somewhere. Let me find it. Yeah, it's actually quite a bit further back. So this is Seladove here. And indeed, you can see there's an airstrike there yesterday. But drone strikes around there. We've got a loaf destroyed. So it's going to be interesting if we see evidence of this. There's some drones hitting things over there, but this is quite a long way back from the front line. And then we're hearing that probably since that mapping update that the Russians tried to attack in the Pokrovsk direction and rolled in with tanks, trucks, and infantry. Tanks got stuck near Seladovitz. That's a long way back from the front line, so they sent in infantry on vans and larders instead. Predictably, they got wiped out in another failed assault. So it could be that tanks got stuck here, and then they actually went to do the attacks further on the front line. But again, going back to these numbers, 170 vehicles and fuel tanks, they're attacking in larder cars and Bukanka Scooby-Doo vans. That is what, I keep talking about combat assets being infantry mobility vehicles, APCs, IFVs, MRAPs, tanks, etc., etc. And actually, for the Russians, their combat assets stretch to Bukankas, Scooby-Doo vans, quads, motorcycles, larders, golf buggies, so on and so forth. So that's another example. We've got so much footage coming out. Here's footage of the 71st Jaeger Brigade repelling a mass Russian mechanized assault, possibly the Velika Novosilka axis, as this brigade is active there. Lately, Russia has restarted using large mechanized columns again. So I don't know the outcome of that one, but Velika Novosilka is further down here, and there's a lot of activity going on around Velika Novosilka. So we have actually it's goodness me, here it is, Velika Novosilka. So we got attacks coming out in all directions from there, and there's some footage pertaining to possibly to that sector, and more equipment getting hit, but I don't know what the outcome of that attack was. On the Zaporizhia front, so that's going further to the left from where we just were. Russian forces launched a mechanized assault with 12 armored vehicles and 2 companies from the Kopani Robotina direction. That is much further over here. That's Robotina there. And we have a claim that all vehicles were destroyed at the start. Survivors dismounted and now being finished off. The Lieutenant Alex reports they tried to probe the line. It ended very badly. And speaking to Andrew Perpetua yesterday, he was talking about this. He said that there were attacks. There was an attack in the Andriivka direction, which is back over here. Where are we? Goodness me. Things are getting all filled in these days, aren't they? So Andriivka is, somewhere around here. Goodness, I'm getting so confused because there's been a lot of filling. I need to do an update on my mapping, don't I? Anyway, of Velika Novosilka, so it's up here. Andriivka, there we are. Andriivka. So he said this long red arrow attack was a huge column that didn't get anywhere near to where they were aiming for. So they were, trying to get over here. And I'm kind of speculating here from what Andrew is saying, but they got completely destroyed. Every single one of the vehicles was destroyed before it got to where they were trying to get to. It was a completely failed attack. He said this is happening quite a lot, that you'd be surprised at the number of attacks that are just, they don't get close to where they're supposed to be aiming for, and they just get completely destroyed. Well, here's a claim that in the Robotina area that happened there, with 12 armored vehicles and 2 companies being basically completely destroyed, and the infantry being finished off. Here we have another video Yesterday, Russian forces launched a large-scale assault in southern Ukraine with around 320 troops, 40 armoured vehicles, 3 tanks and 10 buggies. Again, you got 10 buggies there, showing that within these armoured assaults, you have a lot of these vehicles that end up being combat assets. And in this attack, Ukrainian defenders hit them with drones and artillery. After a 2-hour battle, 29 vehicles and 140 Russians were destroyed. No Ukrainian positions were lost. Now, assuming this is correct, and you can go and check the footage out here, I'm not going to show it to you. My first videos of the day keep getting restricted every day at the moment. Looking at my YouTube studio there, yeah, every single one gets restricted. So I'm getting into trouble for even half showing these. But there is just plenty of footage coming out of Russians getting absolutely shellacked in a number of places, and of course they're still creeping on, making gains here and there. But as Andrew said yesterday, I mean, he was quite upbeat about at least the dire situation of the Russians. He's like, they are really suffering. They are losing phenomenal amounts of people and equipment. It is not looking good for them. Their morale is rock bottom, and they have no ability to do anything significant, and they are just getting attrited with this active defense of the Ukrainians. And I was arguing, well, do the Ukrainians just sit back and concede territory, just like we kind of argued over the last couple of years? But the best way to attrit the Russians is allow them to keep attacking rather than do massive attacks yourselves, because that is arguably more attritional going on the attack than on the defense. Think of how much equipment the Ukrainians have lost now in Kursk. Now, I think the Kursk was a success, but it's just it all went wrong at the end for one reason or another. But actually, the initial gains and what that achieved for them was really good. But they did end up losing quite a lot of equipment in attacking. A lot of equipment we're now finding out they lost because as they retreated, that lost equipment turns up on Russian videos. And some of it was lost in September, October, November, December. But we're only finding out about it now. So they get lumped on these loss lists now. And you think, oh, that happened yesterday. But actually, a lot of this lost equipment has been 6 months in the making. But that's what happens when you attack. When you defend, you're not going to be losing equipment like that because you don't use equipment like that. You don't need the infantry mobility because you're sitting in trench lines and buildings, withstanding these big attacks. But essentially, the TLDR from Andrew speaking yesterday was that the Russians are losing phenomenal amounts of kit. Now, we are seeing more and more footage coming out of Ukrainian aviation attacks. And again, I'm going to repeat myself. I don't know whether that is just more footage being released as opposed to more bombs being dropped. But there are certainly lots of accounts of GBU, these guided bombs from the US being used. Here we have a Su-27 destroying a pontoon crossing in Kursk region using a GBU-39. And there's lots of footage of that kind of stuff. There's another bridge destruction here. Bridge was blown up as a result of a Ukrainian fiber optic drone hitting prepared charges. So they left charges under a bridge and then waited for a drone to be able to get in and then blow them up. Bang. And then that bridge went. Big explosion there. And obviously somewhat prepared. I don't know where that was, to be perfectly honest, but we know that that looks like it's got prepared charges underneath, so it looks like it was somewhere where the Ukrainians were, but there are lots of bridges that are being destroyed. So a bridge destroyed, it could be there, north of Konstantinopil, but it might not be because that looked like some time ago, 20th of December. We've got 3 up in Belgorod, but have you could argue special forces could have got that far to plant explosives, but I doubt it. But anyway, you got bridges in a number of different places being blown up. So that is evidence of one of them. Then we go on to find out about Kursk here from the analyst. Ukraine destroys a Vita factory. Oh no, actually I've left that for later because I don't know if that's a strike or not. We're going to find out about that in a wee while. from, yep, there we go. So we'll place that in there. And we'll then go on to this. So a number of fires at Russian railroads has increased in March, military intelligence says. So the fight against the supply of ammunition and military equipment to the Russian occupation army by rail continues. It will be a result of partisan activity, sabotage either from pro-Ukrainian Russians within Russia or pro-Ukrainian Ukrainians within occupied Ukraine, or just people paid off, people that aren't particularly pro-anti-Russia, but, here's $500. Yep, okay, I'll go and burn a relay box. But the claim is that the number of fires has gone up on the rail network, the Russian rail network. So that's good news there. Right, distant strikes. So last night, we have, again, sub 100 drones in Russian airspace. So remember, the options are, you would if you could, you answer, you can't. So I mean, at the very minimum, that is what's going on. They don't have the ability to send what they were sending, so 150 to 200 drones nightly. So they either don't have the ability to do that because they're stockpiling, or because they have been severely hit in a manufacturing facility or something like that, which I think is perfectly plausible. But there is also the option, and I talked about this in a live the other day, there is the option that they are stockpiling ready for the end of the energy ceasefire. Now, when the energy end of and both sides disagree on what date that actually is, which is bizarre. Nonetheless, the Russians could well be putting, 100 drones a night, a day aside, and stockpiling them ready for the end of the energy ceasefire, and then go absolutely nuts on the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. That is also plausible, and that's something we've got to watch out for. And I mean, the reality is they can't do both 150 drones to 200 drones a night and stockpile. So there's you would if you could, you answer, you can't. So they have to do one or the other. And they either aren't stockpiling, ready for the end of the or for some point, but one presumes the end of the ceasefire, or they either are stockpiling or they aren't. And let's hope that they aren't, and that actually their manufacturing has just been severely impacted for some reason or another. So 75 sent last night, 25 taken out conventionally, 30 taken out by electronic warfare. That is a pretty poor interception rate. So no one's talking about, there's not a lot of information about where those 20 drones out of 75. So that is almost a quarter. That is over 20%, between 20 and 25%. That is not a good interception rate for the Ukrainians. What we do know is Dnipro was hit big time last night. Shaheeds attacked there. Parking lot in the city is burning. Central streets are strewn with glass. So it looks like Dnipro has been hit in pretty much the center. Cars are burning at the strike site in Dnipro. Absolutely targeted strikes on the city center, says Max24. But I don't know any details of Russian strikes outside of this. And, it's easy to think that the Russians aren't having a huge effect on the Ukrainians, on their military capabilities, capacities, whatever. But they could be hitting every single night the military industrial complex, manufacturing facilities. We talk about, they've ramped up all this production of, drones and missiles, but actually, are we seeing these missiles being fired? Why aren't we seeing these missiles being fired? Maybe they are having warehouses that are being hit by these drones. I don't know. I'm completely speculating. But the Russians will be having an effect on a nightly basis. We just, in exactly the same way I came for the Ukrainians, we just don't hear about it. Video footage isn't forthcoming. There's OPSEC, or people are under the regulation of both Russia and Ukraine. People are legally unable to publish a lot of footage. Some people do, and it gets out, but it does come with a risk. And so there are going to be times when damage is done and we just don't hear about it from both sides. Now, during the night, some drones once again attacked the deployment site of the 112th Missile Brigade in the Russian city of Shuya. In total, the Russian Ministry of Defense reports that downing of 71 drones overnight. So we do know from the Russians, not really hearing from anywhere else, that the Ukrainians sent a big wave of drones into Russia again, potentially near the border area in Kursk, where and maybe Belgorod, where the Russians. So we heard that the 448th Brigade was hit, and then last night the 112th. No, 2 nights ago the 112th Brigade. Both of those units were responsible for the Iskander strikes on Sumy that took out 35 civilians. Now we are hearing that the 112th were hit 2 nights ago, and they were hit again last night, and 71 drones were reported as being shot down by the Russians. So one would assume that there would be a lot more drones than that, and maybe they didn't even shoot down all those 71. But that's quite a lot of drones again that Ukraine is sending into Russia. Here we have in Shuya again the 112th Brigade at the time of the strike. So this is a 2 days ago strike. The first strikes on Shuya. Barracks of the Russian 112th Brigade, 12 dead for now, it says Max 24. Looking at that video or referring to that video, and then there's more footage coming out. Here's what the barracks of the Russia's 112th Missile Brigade in Shuya looked like after the Ukrainian drone strike, and this is from 2 days ago. Remember, so those are the barracks there. Now, then it was hit last night. So we have a Russian here recording something, a lot of smoke and chaos. And quote, an effing military unit is burning. Russian Telegram channels report a new drone attack on the 112th Missile Brigade in Shuya, Russia's Ivanovo region. So it's actually not Kursk, it's behind there, Ivanovo, which carried out a strike on the centre of Sumy on Palm Sunday with Iskander-M ballistic missiles. According to the Z bloggers, the strike hit hangars where Iskander missiles are stored. According to the analysis of the footage from eyewitnesses, the hit was near the garages. The location is directly behind the military unit, about 180 metres from the military camp of the 112th Missile Brigade. So don't know what the battle damage assessment is from that. But more video footage here. Shuya burns for the second day in a row. Fresh strikes hit Russia's 112th, the same unit that launched the Iskander-Ms at Sumy. At least one hit the hangar. No wall, no roof left is a claim there on the video. At least 7 explosions were noted. So definitely something has been hit there, or there's been some activity. And finally, no report says another strike on the 112th in Shuya. Ukrainian drones targeted weapon depots, personnel quarters, vehicle shelters, a power substation, and a water tower. This is the same brigade that attacked Sumy. Results are being assessed, but the signs point to serious damage. That's the claim from Knoll reports. So there could be some good effect from those strikes last night. Then we go across to a massive fire, and this is what I had in the first section because I wasn't sure whether this is a Russia on fire, but it seems too close to Ukraine to not be a strike. I don't know. A massive fire is currently raging. So this is yesterday during the daytime. Is currently raging at the APZ-20 ball bearing plant in Kursk, Russia, a facility which is said to be turned into producing components for military equipment such as engines, turbines, and power transmission equipment. Indeed, the area of the fire in Kursk has increased to 10,000 square meters, according to Max 24 yesterday at around 5 p.m. my time. So that would be later in Ukraine. And then the analyst then says Ukraine destroys the Vita factory in Kursk. The site is a ball bearing factory, a critical component in almost anything that moves. Precision ball bearings are key elements in aircraft, tanks, artillery, and almost anything else that rotates. Massive columns of smoke belch from the site as it burns. So ball bearings have been quite an issue over the course of the war. I reported early on in the war that they were struggling to get bearings. A lot of them came from Sweden, and sanctions obviously affected that. The rolling stock for carriages, I think, was affected in the railway industry, and I think they were forced to get cheaper, poorer bearings from China, and evidently making their own there. So it's probably going to be pretty useful to take out a facility like that. And then last night, explosions in Kursk as well. 7+ explosions in Kursk. Here it says Max 24 posting a number of different videos, more from Kursk, etc., etc. Thank you very much, my dear. That's amazing. A cup of tea delivered by my good lady. Excellent. It's half term, you see. That's why things are difficult, because I have my boys still around, And it's not difficult to have my boys around, but it means that my usual schedule is affected. Anyway, so we've had Kursk hit, we've had the bearings factory on fire, we've had the unit in Shuya hit, the 112th hit again, and then probably all sorts of other drone strikes as well. Now we're here today, an explosion has occurred in Lyubertsy in Moscow region at the Vatorai Alumin product plant, so some kind of metalworking plant there. That's from this morning. The explosion could be a result of a strike from drones. We know they can reach Moscow region, certainly. So that could be a strike, but it could also just be a random fire or sabotage. Who knows? And then, very significantly, this fire at a combined heat and power plant, the CHP-26 in Moscow. And that is a pretty significant fire going on there. And I'm sure that will have an effect on power generation. I have no idea how that started either. Again, sabotage or a strike or whatnot, but that's two places on fire in Moscow region, and you're starting to hear claims that, hey, we've increased the output of ballistic and cruise missiles 8-fold and this fold and whatever, and yet we're never quite sure when they're used, and then suddenly fires turn up here and there, and you're like, well, was that a missile? Was that a drone? And I don't know at all, but it could be. Okay. Russia's birth rate, as mentioned, has fallen to a 200-year low. That is definitely an issue they're going to have to deal with. Probably more realistically with immigration. And the problem is with immigration is they don't treat immigrants particularly well in Russia. And there is a very much an ultra-nationalist vibe going on in Russia. The other option is called having as many babies as possible, but that's not something that will solve the economy for another 20 years, right? So that is an issue they are facing, but it's an issue actually the Ukrainians are majorly facing. What they need to do is bring a lot of their population back. They've lost a lot of good Ukrainian people, working age people, out to the wider world in response to the war. Now, the Kremlin is reportedly using a seized US food company to supply the Russian military. Glav Product, a canned food producer originally founded by Los Angeles-based businessman Leonid Smirnov, obviously of Russian descent now, I would have thought, is the only US company to fall under Russian state control since the start of the full-scale war against Ukraine. That's now being co-opted to produce food for the Russian military. Ukraine alleges another unarmed prisoner was executed by Russia. Unfortunately, sadly typical. The prosecutor's office in Free Donetsk region made this statement regarding the shooting, which happened near Rozdolna last Friday. However, the evidence they provided is inconclusive and no video was released. I think that's just images. We also hear that last year the Ukrainian military helped. Okay, this is just one out of many similar stories, and I haven't told you any of these stories previously, but there's a whole host of these of basically Russians in the Kursk region actually getting on really well with the Ukrainians, saying actually the Ukrainian soldiers, when they invaded, treated them really well. They didn't do this, they didn't do that, they brought them bread, they brought them this, and which is all part of the hearts and minds of the Ukrainian armed forces, and it's not in their best interest to do bad things to the local civilian population in Kursk, right? And the Russians would be publicly saying this. Now, you could argue that could be PR from the Ukrainian point of view and propaganda, etc., etc. But anyway, there were these videos of these people saying, yeah, these guys are fine, we have no problem with them. And then when the Russians came back in, those same people are seen on video saying we were treated horribly, it was horrible, they were murdering, blah, blah, blah. And there's obviously lying going on somewhere. Either they were lying when the Ukrainians were controlling that area of Kursk, or they were lying when the Russians came in. I would think the latter, because it's the Russians' MO to get people to disinform. Well, they are just disinformation kings, aren't they? But here, in this incident, last year, the Ukrainian military helped the pregnant daughter of a Shuya resident, Elena Fasova, by taking her to Sumy, where she gave birth to a boy, then bringing her back Elena said that her daughter Yulia would have died in childbirth if it had not been for the Ukrainian military medic. So she was interviewed, obviously saying, wonderful things about how they treated her daughter and how her daughter's now alive because she was taken for medical care and childbirth in Sumy in the Ukraine, right, and then taken back to Russia. After Shuya returned to Russian control, Elena Fasova instantly shifted her ground and now calls Ukrainians inhumans who kill anyone who looks at them wrong. Really typical, but really sad. And here you've got a Russian talking to her, and the question is she lying? Is she, under duress? Is she made to say that stuff? Make up your own conclusions, but that happens an awful lot, it seems. Right, Ukrainian intelligence is saying that North Korean forces may join new Russian spring offensives into northeastern Sumy and Kharkiv after they have adapted to modern combat tactics in Russia's Kursk fighting there. That means that they are using drones themselves and whatnot. This is something I talked about yesterday, that if these North Koreans are used into Ukraine, then that is a very different situation from being used in Russia. So the North Koreans have been used up here in the Kursk region. My goodness, there's an awful lot going on, isn't there? In the Kursk region, as the Ukrainians have attacked into Russia, and the bilateral agreement between North Korea and Russia has meant that they can come and help the Russians if they've been invaded, right? And so you can get away with allowing the North Koreans. I think it's still deeply problematic, but it goes some way to explaining why the international community was somewhat reluctant to react too much to North Koreans being utilized there, because it's in Russia. But if they start attacking into Ukraine, you start thinking that North Koreans are now attacking a sovereign nation in Europe, geographical Europe. And then that might garner quite a different response from allies of Ukraine. But the intelligence here is suggesting that may well happen. They could attack into Sumy and Kharkiv in the north here, as, both in this area or this area. And, that's a bit of a game changer, I would argue. Now, many people are saying, and actually, I've listened to quite a few analysts, a few on Times Radio and other places recently, saying exactly the same. Michael Clark was saying this on Sky News yesterday, that North Korea have basically saved Russia's ass. They have underwritten Russia's ability to remain in the fight for the last year. So here, Devana says, North Korea saved Putin from losing the war. Reuters' investigation has revealed that for nearly 20 months, millions of North Korean artillery shells were funneled into the Russian front lines in Ukraine. In many areas, the majority of shells fired by Russian forces in the past year were made in North Korea. I mean, Michael Clark was talking about pretty much all of the shells in certain contexts were North Korean. And it wasn't just shells. By the end of 2023, Russia began launching North Korean ballistic missiles at Ukrainian cities. One such strike on central Kharkiv on January the 2nd, 2024, left devastation so extreme that a Reuters reporter described it as unlike anything he had seen before. According to Hugh Griffiths, former UN coordinator monitoring sanctions on North Korea, quote, North Korean artillery shells are a strategic imperative. Without them, Putin would have lost this war in Ukraine. Russia simply doesn't have the industrial capacity to produce the ammunition it needs. It depends on North Korea. While the West debates not escalating, North Korea arms a nuclear-armed terrorist state. This isn't about Ukraine versus Russia anymore. It's a global alliance of tyranny versus democracy. And this is the problem, is that let's not just think about whether North Koreans are being used here, human beings being used as soldiers. Let's also focus on the fact that the most sanctioned nation on earth, North Korea, is providing an absolute multiple tons of ammunition and weapons systems to Ukraine. And the US has been pretty much silent on this. Trump appears to be fully on Russia's side. And it's just an absolute shocker that I think Russia have got away with partnering up with North Korea. There's been a real lack of quality response to that. Now, Zelensky said last night Russia must come to terms with the idea of the inevitability of Ukraine's power, and a truly reliable peace can be achieved precisely when reality forces Russia to come to terms with our capabilities. Partners are preparing new support packages for Ukraine. Work is underway on an agreement on mineral resources with the US, and if it progresses as actively as it is now, it will definitely be signed and will benefit both Ukraine and the US. That's an interesting second part there. That's for this first part about where the rubber hits the road, or whatever the saying is. Andrew Perpetua talked about this yesterday, that he thinks that, and I would agree, that Vladimir Putin as well as Trump just exist in an information bubble that means they actually have no grasp about what's going on the front lines and in the war in general. So Putin believes his own BS and disinformation, and we can argue about how that happens and how the information goes up the chain of command and gets distorted, and who actually does know what's going on and who doesn't, and does Gerasimov have a real fundamental knowledge about what's going on? He's actually been pretty absent for the last year since he was kind of injured in Crimea, as was thought. But Putin doesn't really know what's going on, and probably doesn't realize how bad it is for the Russians. And Trump doesn't really know what's going on and thinks it's way worse for the Ukrainians because he's listened to the Russian propaganda. So there is interesting. A truly reliable peace can be achieved precisely when reality forces Russia to come to terms with our capabilities. So when actually there is some kind of final realization for Putin that as to how screwed they are, how many troops they have lost, what their economic predicament is, what their situation is with regard to materiel and the lack thereof, it could force him to get more seriously to the negotiating table. And then interesting that it appears that the Ukrainians have probably been able to. We know that the Americans have reduced their demands in the mineral deal from $300 billion worth of money. I say money, natural resources, whatever, but money being extorted from Ukraine. They were demanding that we've given $300 billion worth of kit, so therefore we're going to take $300 billion worth of stuff from you. Actually, that's been negotiated down to $100 billion, which is an acceptance from the Americans that they haven't given $300 billion, which is very interesting in and of itself. So we've heard that from the news recently. But it could be that the Ukrainians really are doing a good job, like they did the first time round with the minerals deal, and then it didn't get signed at the White House because they had that big argument. But actually, the Ukrainians have really done a good job of negotiating all the worst aspects of that deal away. And then they were just hit with a kind of even worse deal later. And at least the hint from Zelensky here is that if it goes as it has been going recently, if it progresses as actively as it is now, then we'll sign it pretty damn soon, and it will be a benefit to both nations. And if that is the case, I don't know if they had to pass that. I presume they've got to pass that through the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament. And I'd assume if they pass it, then it is going to be genuinely beneficial for Ukraine. I really hope that's the case. And if it is, well done them. We know that they got a legal team. I forget the name of the legal team, but they did get an American legal team to operate on their behalf in these negotiations, again, with the United States on the minerals deal. We also know that today the US is to hold talks on Ukraine with Kyiv's European allies. So Trump's Steve Witkoff and Marco Rubio, so that's the envoy to Russia, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, are meeting European officials in Paris, reportedly to discuss Russia-Ukraine war resolution strategies today. So today could be a big day. I did a breaking news update last night on the US office that counters foreign disinformation being eliminated. Yesterday, Pekka Kallioniemi says, my colleagues in DC are saying that you can't use the words disinformation and FIMI, foreign information manipulation and interference, in any official context anymore. The US has given up on fighting against BS. In fact, they now fully embrace it. This is deeply worrying that the US is now not doing anything to counter disinformation, when disinformation is one of the biggest threats, I think, to national security going forward. We are fighting for what is true and what isn't true. But as I call it very often, it's an epistemic crisis we're in. This is, national security, cyber security. We need epistemic security. And at the moment, the US, like Russia, spends 150 billion a year, I think, on all their disinformation and, those kind of projects, and the US here was spending 50 million on one department. They shut that down. It's just complete nonsense. But we'll end up with some good news here. This is something, says Edward Hunter Christie, 2 sets of fans from 2 rival Lithuanian football teams chanting for Ukraine in tandem, each answering the other. This is absolutely brilliant. It shows the depth of support for Ukraine in the Baltics. And of course, it's not football, that's basketball. I get my balls confused. Never confuse your balls. That's, the mantra of the day. But really good to see, my goodness, and that is quite some basketball crowd. We don't see chanting like that at basketball in the UK or even the US. That's pretty darned impressive. So well done to those Lithuanians showing some great support for Ukraine there. Slava Ukraine. Loving it. Anyway, thanks for watching. Really appreciate your support. It's been a long one today, but hey ho. Hope you've enjoyed your coffee. But of course, as we all know, and you should know this by now, really. So we all know this. Tea is the drink of the secular gods, not coffee. It's always tea. Good cup of Yorkshire tea. Half a sugar for me. Thank you very much. And that does us all a good turn. Take care. Speak soon.